Hi BookTube, Aaron here. I hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be wrapping up everything that I read in the month of September, and then I'm going to go through my plans for October and go through what I'm reading at the moment and stuff like that. Then at the very end of the video I've got a new book to show you, a kind of single book haul that I got for my birthday a few days ago, and if I choose to go into it straight away, then it might disrupt my reading plans a little bit, so we'll see how things go. To start off then with some books from September, I'm going to go very quickly through the first few because I made a reading update partway through the month, so I've already talked about these, and I'll leave a link to that earlier video in the description if you want to hear a little bit more about them. The first one then is Vita Nuova by Dante, which I loved and I can see myself reading over and over again. I want to try a different translation of it next time. I'm not exactly sure which, but I'll do a bit of digging and see what's out there. But yeah, I love the Vita Nuova, and I want to at least read it one more time before reading the Divine Comedy again. And then I'm currently in the middle of reading the Cantos by Ezra with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. And so then early in September I finished reading this little guide to the Cantos by Kearns. This is just Pound the Cantos, part of the Landmark of World Literature series, and it's I think anything like that is really useful, just to give you a grounding in this very chaotic work. So yeah, that was helpful. And then one of the standout books for September, at least for me, was Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, which was just a really wonderful, beautiful book about what we do with language, what we do with making meaning, how our own memories and experience sort of build up the way we see the world, and then we have to sort of reconstruct it again to be able to relate it, and a lot more, but just done in a really whimsical, magical way. So I absolutely love Invisible Cities. And then I read something I really should have read this, or I should have waited to read this for October, in October, but I read it in September anyway, and that's A Beleaguered City and Other Stories by Margaret Oliphant. They're all sort of ghost stories, or stories of what she called the seen and the unseen, or sort of something like that. So they're not all sort of classical ghost stories as you might imagine them, but there were one or two good stories in there. I sort of found the whole thing to be a bit of a mixed bag. And then I also read the collected poems and selected prose of Charlotte Mew. Much preferred the poetry to the prose. The prose didn't really grab me, but the poetry I wish there was more of, and I think I'll try and get back to her poetry again at some point. And then, sort of after finishing Charlotte Mew and Margaret Oliphant and stuff like that, I had a buddy read coming up, but had some time, and so wanted to sort of squeeze something in the middle. And so I picked up The Man of 50 by Goethe, which I really enjoyed. I found it really quite entertaining. Does it say who translated this? I'm sure it does somewhere. By by Andrew Piper, and it was it's a really funny, ironic story about this man who's just turned 50, wanting to consolidate his own sort of family estate with that of his sister, who's a widow, and his solution to this is to marry off his son with her daughter. So they're both first cousins, but it seems like no one really cares. And there's a hitch in the plan, which is that the daughter of the man of 50's sister, so his niece, is in love with someone else, and it turns out that that someone else is him. So she's in love with her own uncle. He sort of, yeah, accepts a kind of proposal, and they're just going to do it that way instead, and he just has to break the sad news to his son that that he's not able to marry his cousin anymore. And his son is quite happy about the whole thing because he's in love with someone else, and it just goes on and on in that sort of absurd fashion. It reminded me a lot of Thomas Mann and of Death in Venice, and particularly with the main character, as he's about, he's thinking of wedding this much younger woman. I mean, she's barely out of her teens, or I think still in her teens, and he gets a valet whose single purpose is to look after his makeup and his sort of routine, his sort of beautification routine. And it's sort of like in Death in Venice, where the main character, because of this boy that he's in love with and obsessed by, he goes to the barbers and just sort of slightly each time has his hair dyed a little bit more, and has a bit of rouge on the cheeks and the lips to make himself stand out and look a bit more youthful, and just a little, make it look like the blood is maybe flowing a little bit faster than it is. And I think that's probably something that Mann picked up from the Man of 50. And actually it reads a lot like something from around the time of Thomas Mann. The way that Goethe is quite happy just sort of suggesting things, and doesn't give you everything. And so it's a very economical, well told little story. As I said, very ironic, quite funny and over the top. But I found it to be a lot of fun. So if you ever come across it, then give it a go. And this is my little taster for Goethe. It's the first thing I've ever read by Goethe, and I'm hoping to read Faust next month, which I'll get into a little bit later. Then moving on, maybe one of the main works of poetry that I was focusing on in September was the selected poems of Adonis. Adonis is a Syrian poet currently based in Paris. I think he's been in Paris for some time. And I hadn't heard of him until earlier this year, and then was intrigued by him and decided to pick this up. And this is really, really wonderful. At times the poetry reminds me of Octavio Paz. At other times he reminds me of Borges. Who else has he reminded me of? Sometimes of the sort of early 20th century sort of surrealists, and of, maybe René Char and Pierre Reverdy, and people like that. And then later on, as he's writing poems from France, he's engaging a little bit more with French poets like Rimbaud and Baudelaire and stuff. But earlier on, he's obviously engaging with, and all the way through, he's engaging with great Arabic poets, which is, that's going to be an education for me, I think, trying to understand and get a better grip of the history of Arabic poetry. And there's Dante and so many poets from sort of across the world, and the way he manages to sort of mesh them together, and he sort of plays with these sort of cultural lines, these little strings sort of going out in all different directions that he manages to sort of redirect and connect back together. It's really, really wonderful. The poetry itself starts off quite spare and simple. That's when it reminds me the most of surrealist and cubist poets. And then it sort of grows with time. Then going on from there, the poetry becomes more expansive. And even though some of these earlier poems are dealing more, they have a bit of his own time and of the way history is kind of disrupting his life. That theme of, well, just the way in which the current events of his day were so turbulent, in Syria and in the Middle East more generally, in his lifetime from the 50s through to the present. It can't escape the poetry in the same way that the Troubles don't, they can't escape the poetry of Seamus Heaney. And yet there's then mythology and religion and all kinds of stuff from all kinds of places all in there. And I thought I'd read a couple of early poems that deal with, well, I think to a certain extent, a little bit of his own history and of the task of the poet to still create something beautiful in turbulent times, even if they're destroyed or the things they love are destroyed. And then he's playing with his namesake, with Adonis from the Metamorphoses and from Greek mythology. And I think Adonis brings forward the point that this character, Adonis, probably dates from earlier mythologies and has been interpreted, sort of interwoven into stories from Greek mythology, and so it's sort of got probably quite a there's a case to be made for it to be a probably a Near Eastern myth, maybe Mesopotamian or somewhere like that. And so he's quite, is it part of what makes the poems interesting and his work interesting is the way he sort of investigates the way that his own culture is sort of connected to so many other cultures in so many other ways, and the ways in which a part of the world that now is in dire straits for so many cultures, so many people at so many times, has been one of the most important places in the world. Anyway, a digression. I'll just read you these two poems that are two of the earlier, simpler poems, but get across the quality of his work that I really enjoy, the way that he brings out mythology. Both Adonis and Orpheus, I think, are sort of present in both of these poems. So the first one is the first poem in the whole selection, and it's called Love. Love. The road and the house love me, the living and the dead, and a red clay jug at home loved by water. The neighbour loves me, the field, threshing floor, and fire. Toiling arms that better the world love me, and go unrewarded with joy. And tatters of my brother scattered about, torn from his wilted chest, hidden by wheat spikes and season, a carnelian from which blood shies. He was the god of love as long as I lived. What will love do if I too am gone? I felt there was a fair bit going on there. It could be a present day corpse that he's sort of seeing there and putting into the poem. Could be the broken body of Adonis. It could be the body of Orpheus torn apart. It could be any number of things, and many of them at the same time, hidden by the weeds sort of growing up. Anyway, and then later on, a similar poem called Song. Song. Bells on our eyelashes and the death throes of words, and I among fields of speech, a knight on a horse made of dirt. My lungs are my poetry, my eyes a book, and I, under the skin of words, on the beaming banks of foam, a poet who sang and died, leaving this singed elegy before the faces of poets, for birds at the edge of sky. And so, yeah, if either of those poems stood out to you and resonated with you, I'd recommend the selected poems of Adonis. This is translated by Khaled, Mattawa, and at least then, you know, they're earlier poems, and so I think from them you'll sort of get a grounding and then get used to his poetry, and then as it sort of flourishes as his career goes on, hopefully you can sort of just go with it and sort of ride that wave, as it were. And then there's one more book to briefly talk about, because again I've made a separate video about this, and I'll again leave it in the description if you want to hear a bit more about it. And that's The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which I loved. I read this with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, and he loved it as well. He went straight ahead and watched the film and loved the film. I might try and see the film at some point, but I'm probably not going to rush to see it. I'm not really watching many films at the moment. It's just not what I'm being drawn to, so we'll see when I see it. But yeah, a great book. And then on to what I'm reading at the moment. As I said earlier, I'm still currently in the middle, or well, about a quarter of the way, reading through the Cantos of Ezra Pound, and I'm again reading with my booktube colleague Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, and I'm up to now the 5th decade of Cantos. So from what would that be? Canto. I'm terrible at Roman numerals. I'll work it out some other time. Is that 62 maybe? But anyway, no, it's not. I'm hoping to get at least that 5th decade of Cantos done in October, because it has been slow going. I do like to try and look up things that he's including that are in other languages or that aren't familiar to me, since his approach to poetry is, you know, that kind of collage approach, and he throws it in untranslated, sometimes with no context, abrupt changes of scene and things like that, and of resonance and of register and things. And so yeah, it can be slow going, and I tend to have to go over things multiple times to work out what's going on. So hopefully I'll be able to get through the 5th decade, so 10 more cantos in October. Apparently these cantos, based off the notes of whoever had this book before me, deal with Siena and the Leopoldine reforms, and then a study of Duke Leopold, who parallels in Italy the careers of Jefferson, Adams, and von Buren in America. And we'll see if that's so, I suppose. And potentially more celebratory cantos rather than Ezra Pound in rant mode, where he just kind of is relentless. So we'll see how that goes. I've also been, since August, I've been reading through the complete poems and plays of T.S. Eliot, and really through August I got through all of the poetry, and so now I'm just trying to get through the plays. In September I read Murder in the Cathedral, which I talked about in my reading wrap-up in mid-September, and then just this morning I read The Family Reunion, which was really, really odd. I think quite a compelling reading experience, but I think when T.S. Eliot does drama, it's very much in the vein of Greek tragedians, and And with Murder in the Cathedral, it's set, in the 11th century with the murder of Thomas Becket, or is it the 12th century? Doing terrible with numbers today. But there's that historical remove, and so this sort of high, sort of tragic mode to the language, and to, you can sort of imagine it, and it sort of working because of the historical remove that Eliot's decided to work with. However, the family reunion would have been contemporary to T.S. Eliot. It would have come out in 1939 and would have been normal everyday people from that period that Eliot, people in Eliot's day would have recognised. It's about a aristocratic family getting together for the sort of matriarch of the family's birthday, and there's this one character who's been away from the family been away from home for over a decade and lost his wife 8 years ago, and it's about guilt and being chased by guilt. The Eumenides make an appearance, and it's about family secrets, and I didn't really understand what exactly he was trying to say, but it was incredibly compelling, and it's fascinating to see how Eliot is recycling stuff that he's already sort of worked on in previous poems, and he's still trying to work them out and work out what he thinks in these plays. And so you get images in the family reunion that will remind you of the wasteland and of four quartets, which he was working on at the same time. And it is fascinating. So I think for a reader and a fan of Eliot, I can recommend the family reunion. But as a work of drama, as something to see in a theatre, I have absolutely no idea. I don't think it would work at all. And it sounds like it wasn't wasn't particularly popular in its day. Then a kind of early Victober thing, towards the end of September, I picked up the poems and prose of Gerard Manley Hopkins, which I've been really, really loving. I've read him before in sort of shorter selections, and I don't know, that the poetry is just coming to me in a much more intense way, and I'm getting what he's doing a lot more, and it's just incredible. So I'll do a Hopkins Poetry Thursday, hopefully, before too long. I've been letting Poetry Thursday slip over the last year or so I'm going to try and improve that a little bit soon. But I'm about to get on to the prose, his selected letters and diary entries and things, and so hopefully I'll just dip into them, and there'll be room for other poets at other points, for Ezra Pound and some other stuff. And then, upon finishing the Goldfinch, I picked up Q by Luther Blazet. Luther Blazet are a collective of, I think, 4 writers based in Bologna, and it's been translated by, let's have a look, it's not put in by Sean Whiteside, and it's a really fascinating book about the Reformation. Whoops, I just lost my bookmark. And about a character who's drawn up in some of the most extreme fringes of the Reformation, of the Anabaptists and of peasant revolts, and of these brotherhoods that are sort of almost utopian, but can often turn violent and want to bring down all earthly powers to usher in the kingdom of heaven. And it's about this character who somehow manages to survive every time one of these movements is stifled, whether they tear each other apart or whether Catholic or Lutheran forces push against them. And so he manages to reinvent himself and find himself somewhere else. But he's sort of constantly being thwarted, and he realises as the book goes on that as a follower he's interested in these movements and is constantly drawn into them, but there's someone else who's following them, but not for the same reasons, and it's kind of an espionage kind of thing where he realizes there must have been a double agent in each of these groups the whole time, and so we have this main character's narrative. That's the bulk of the book, but it's interspersed by these letters, mostly by this mysterious double agent from the background who goes by the initial Q. So it's really, really good, and the way it just gives you the flavour of 16th century Europe and of just everything that was going on is really, really good. But I mean, I've just rattled on about it, and I haven't even finished it yet. So I'll talk about it again at some other point. And then very quickly, I'll just go through some of the things I'm hoping to read in the rest of October. A work of poetry that I want to try and get to, and maybe I'll read once I've got to the prose section of the Hopkins book, would be HD, Hermetic Definitions, that I picked up recently in a lovely poetry book haul. And so I think I'll get to HD. I've also been sort of drawn back to Rilke, and I've been just randomly dipping into the Book of Hours by Rilke. So there's a chance I'll also bring Rilke out and read him with a bit more intention over October as well. I watched a wonderful video from Adam Walker about the poetry of Rilke, which I'll put in the description as well. And that's, I mean, I was already feeling like coming back to him this autumn and reading some more Rilke, but that video sort of spurred me on, and so yeah, I'll be probably reading a fair bit of Rilke in the coming weeks. And then it's Victober, as I've said a couple of times in October, and there's Steve Donahue is reading out some Trollope, and often when he reads out Trollope, he does it from time to time, since we all have our bad habits, and I tend to listen along, and I've been finding I quite enjoy Trollope from what I've heard from Steve, and so he's started reading out Can You Forgive Her, which I believe is the first book in the in the Palliser series, and so I'm going to read along. So I'm going to wait for a few chapters to be read out and recorded by Steve, and then once I've got a nice little stash of chapters, I'll put an evening aside and read a few chapters at a time. So it might not be the main thing that I'm reading, but I think it'll be a lot of fun, and a nice way to join in with Victober this year. My main project for October will be the first book, the inaugural book in my little Faustian project for this sort of autumn and early winter, and I'm starting off with Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. This has got the A text and the B text, so two different versions of the play, and I'm just going to go in and nerd out a bit. I think I'm just going to read both versions and then go into all of the critical apparatus at the back, and go into the stuff here about Calvinism, the stuff here about the figure of the devil in English literature at the period, and just the history of the Faust legend and all kinds of stuff. So it's going to be a great place to start off with my little Faustian project, and then I'll move on to Goethe, and then after Goethe I'm going to move on to Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus. It's also another event in October is October, celebrating the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and so I've been meaning to make a bit more of a dent in my complete stories of Poe. And so I'm not sure how much I will read. I seem to remember the last time I was reading through this, I read all the way up to the beginning of the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, but I really can't remember much of these early stories, so I might just start from scratch and slowly start making my way through the complete stories of Edgar Allan Poe, and see if that stretches out through the winter. We'll see how long that takes. But then very quickly, just to finish off, there's that book that might just dash all of my plans, a book that I got for my birthday a few days ago. And it's a book I've been looking out for some time. And that's The New Roman Empire, A History of Byzantium by Anthony Caldelis. And it's a big, heavy book, but I have a fascination with the Eastern Roman Empire, with Byzantine history, and this seems to be a new sort of general history of the Byzantine period from one of our best living Byzantine historians, Anthony Caldelis. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and it's very tempting just to dive straight into it. I think I'll probably wait until I've made some progress on T.S. Eliot, maybe read a few more plays by him, and maybe made a little more progress with Christopher Marlowe and Ezra Pound. But we'll see how it goes. I might just ditch all of my plans and read Anthony Caldelis instead. And so there we go. That's my sort of wrap up and reading plans video. Feel free to let me know what you think of any of these books, if you've read of any of them, with Edgar Allan Poe, if you have any favourite Poe stories, or whatever, and let me know if you've been reading anything interesting as well. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.